He was just a quiet, single father, walking his daughter through a snowy parking lot, until he saw a teenage girl being forced into a van. In that one terrifying moment, he didn't think. He ran. What happened next would not only save a life, it would create a bond that no one saw coming. This is the true story of how one ordinary man became an unexpected hero, and how a single act of courage changed the course of 4 lives forever. If you're new to the channel, please subscribe and like this video. It helps us bring you more powerful true stories. Tell us in the comments where you're watching from, and if this story moved you, we'd love to hear your thoughts. Now, let's jump into the story. It was just another quiet evening in mid-January, the kind where the air was cold enough to sting the nose, and the streetlights cast a golden glow over the snow. Ryan Moore had just picked up his 5-year-old daughter, Ellie, from her art class. Her tiny hands were wrapped in red mittens, and she held on to his fingers as they walked across the grocery store parking lot. The snow beneath their boots crunched softly. Cars idled nearby, and distant laughter echoed from a family loading their trunk. Ryan looked down at Ellie and smiled. She was chatting about her drawing, a picture of a unicorn flying over a rainbow. Life, for a brief moment, felt calm. But life has a way of changing in an instant. As they approached their car, something caught Ryan's attention. A sudden movement, sharp, unnatural. From the corner of his eye, he saw a black van with its side door open. Inside, a man was struggling to pull a teenage girl into the backseat. Her eyes were wide with terror. Her mouth was covered. She kicked, fought, but the man was strong. The scene was silent, except for the girl's shoes scraping against the icy pavement. Ryan froze. His heart pounded in his chest. He looked down at Ellie, then back at the van. He didn't think, he just acted. "Stay here," he whispered, gently guiding Ellie behind a nearby car. She didn't question him. She just nodded, sensing something was wrong. Then Ryan ran. He sprinted toward the van. Yelling as loud as he could, the man looked up, startled. He tried to shut the door, but Ryan reached it first. He grabbed the man's arm and pulled with everything he had. The girl tumbled halfway out of the van, her hands clawing at the ground. The attacker fought back, swinging a heavy fist that caught Ryan in the jaw. Pain exploded across his face, but he didn't let go. They struggled in the snow, slipping, fists flying. Ryan wasn't a fighter. He was a freelance graphic designer. Most of his battles were with deadlines and design software. But tonight, something deep inside him had awakened. Not fear, not anger, purpose. The girl managed to crawl away, tears freezing on her cheeks. Someone nearby screamed. A car horn blared. People were starting to notice. The man shoved Ryan hard against the van door. Ryan fell to the ground. For a second, everything spun. His head throbbed. The man turned to run, but Ryan reached out and grabbed his leg. He held on tightly, refusing to let go. "Help," he shouted over and over. His voice cracked, but it was loud, desperate. Within moments, others arrived. A man in a hoodie tackled the attacker. Another person called the police. Sirens wailed in the distance. The nightmare was ending. Ryan lay on the ground, snow soaking into his jeans, blood trickling from his lip. He turned his head and saw Ellie peeking from behind the car, her little face full of fear and confusion. But she was safe. The girl was safe. He closed his eyes. When Ryan opened them again, he was inside an ambulance. A paramedic was checking his blood pressure. The teenage girl sat nearby, wrapped in a blanket. She looked at him for a moment, then reached out and gently squeezed his hand. Her name, he would later learn, was Mara. She was 16. She had been walking home from a friend's house when the man had grabbed her. She hadn't screamed. She couldn't. Fear had taken her voice. She had nearly given up until she saw Ryan. A stranger, a father, someone who didn't look away. The police arrested the attacker on the spot. He had a record, multiple offenses. Mara had been lucky. Or maybe it wasn't luck. Maybe it was something more. Back at home, Ryan held Ellie close. She asked if the girl was okay. He said yes. He didn't tell her everything. Not yet. But he kissed the top of her head and whispered, "You're safe. We're okay." That night, while Ellie slept peacefully in her bed, Ryan stood by the window, staring out at the snow-covered street. His face still ached, his knuckles were bruised, but inside, something felt different. Not just relief, something deeper. He had acted without thinking, without knowing the full risk. And yet, he didn't regret it. 3 years ago, he might not have done the same. When his wife passed away during childbirth, Ryan had nearly lost himself in grief. He had become quiet, withdrawn. He lived for Ellie, but often just went through the motions. He never saw himself as brave, just a man trying to hold things together. But that evening had changed something in him. He didn't just protect Mara. He found a part of himself he thought was gone, a part that believed in doing what's right, even when it's hard, especially when it's hard. And in that one moment, when he didn't look away, Ryan Moore began a journey he never expected. A journey that would soon connect two families, change the course of their lives, and remind them all that one act of courage can echo far beyond the moment. This was only the beginning. The headlines called him a hero. Strangers online left comments filled with praise. "The brave dad who saved a girl from danger," one article said. Another called him a quiet guardian in the snow. But Ryan Moore didn't feel like a hero. Not really. 2 days after the incident, he sat at his kitchen table with a bag of frozen peas pressed to his jaw. His daughter Ellie sat nearby, coloring quietly, unaware of the weight her father carried. Every time Ryan closed his eyes, he saw Mara's terrified face. He heard the silence in that moment. No screams, no words, just fear. The phone had been ringing almost nonstop. Friends, reporters, even a local radio host. Ryan ignored most of the calls. He didn't want attention. He just wanted things to feel normal again. But normal had a way of changing. That evening, a knock came at the door. Ryan opened it to find a woman standing there, holding a tray of muffins in trembling hands. Her eyes were tired, red from crying but kind. "You're Ryan, right?" she asked softly. He nodded. "I'm Juliet. I'm Mara's mom." For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Ryan stepped aside and invited her in. They sat in the kitchen, the silence between them heavy but not cold. Ellie offered Juliet a crayon. Juliet smiled gently. Then her hands began to shake again. "I don't know how to thank you," she said. "You didn't have to do what you did, but you did, and you saved her." Ryan looked down at the table. "I didn't think. I just ran. Anyone would have done the same." "No," Juliet replied. "Not everyone would have." Juliet was a florist. She had been raising Mara alone since her husband left 5 years ago. She worked long hours, often from dawn to dusk, to make ends meet. Mara was her world, and the thought of losing her had nearly destroyed her. Ryan listened quietly as she spoke. He didn't interrupt, just nodded. Sometimes silence can be the most respectful form of listening. After a while, Ellie climbed onto Ryan's lap and rested her head on his chest. Juliet watched the two of them, her eyes soft. "You've been through things too, haven't you?" she asked. Ryan hesitated, then gave a small nod. "My wife passed away 5 years ago, during childbirth. Ellie was born early. There were complications. He didn't say more, but he didn't need to. The pain in his voice filled in the rest. "I'm sorry," Juliet said. They sat for a while longer. No expectations, no pressure. Just two single parents, both carrying stories too heavy for words. In the days that followed, Juliet returned, sometimes with baked goods, sometimes with just a quiet hello. Mara visited too, usually shy, often silent, but always watching. She would sit on the floor with Ellie and quietly help her build puzzles or draw flowers in her coloring books. Ryan noticed how Mara always glanced at the windows, how she flinched at sudden noises. Trauma, he knew, had its own way of lingering. But he also saw something else. How Ellie made her smile, even if just for a second. How Juliet seemed to breathe easier when they were all together. What began as quiet visits slowly turned into something more. Juliet started staying for coffee. Mara would help Ellie set the table. One night, Ryan made soup, and Juliet brought bread. They sat together, not as guests, but as something else, something growing. Still, Ryan wrestled with guilt, not from the parking lot, but from years before, from the days when he couldn't get out of bed, from the nights he let Ellie cry herself to sleep while he sat staring at the wall. He had done his best, but sometimes his best didn't feel like enough. Juliet had her own regrets. She blamed herself for letting Mara walk home that day. She had always trusted her daughter, but trust didn't stop danger. One evening, after dinner, Juliet helped Ryan wash the dishes. The kids were in the living room, giggling over a board game. The kitchen was quiet, warm, peaceful. "Do you ever wonder if it's okay to be happy again?" Juliet asked. Ryan looked at her. He didn't speak right away. Then he said, "I wonder that every day." She smiled, a small, sad smile. "Me too." They didn't say more, but they didn't need to. Healing doesn't always come in big moments. Sometimes, it comes in the quiet ones. The ones where two people wash dishes side by side. Where a child's laughter echoes down the hall. Where hope returns, slowly, without asking permission. In the weeks that followed, Mara began therapy. Ellie drew pictures of the four of them, holding hands under the sun. Juliet and Ryan continued to meet, talk, and share simple evenings. They didn't call. They didn't rush. They just showed up. And for the first time in a long time, Ryan began to feel something he hadn't felt in years. Peace. He didn't know what the future held, but he knew one thing. He wasn't alone anymore. And sometimes, that's the first step to everything else. The snow had melted. Winter was slowly giving way to early spring. The air still carried a chill, but the days were longer now. Ryan Moore had started leaving the curtains open more often, letting in the sunlight. It made the house feel warmer, more alive. Mara visited often. She never said much, but her presence spoke volumes. Sometimes she sat with Ellie on the living room rug, helping her build small wooden towers. Other times, she simply listened to music with her headphones in, swaying gently, lost in her own world. Ryan noticed how she still jumped at sudden noises, how she always checked the locks twice before sitting down. Trauma doesn't leave quickly. It settles deep, wrapping itself around everything. But there were small signs of healing. She laughed more now. She looked people in the eye again. And when she spoke, it was with careful, chosen words. Juliet, too, had become a steady part of their lives. She brought groceries without asking. She texted Ryan when the weather turned rough. She stayed late after dinner, cleaning up without being asked. There were no labels between them, no talk of what they were becoming, just quiet understanding. One Saturday afternoon, Ellie scraped her knee at the park. Ryan reached for her, but Ellie turned to Juliet first, wrapping her arms around her legs. Juliet bent down and kissed the top of her head, comforting her with soft words and gentle hands. Ryan stood watching, surprised by how natural it all felt. Not forced, not planned, just right. After that day, something began to shift. The dinners continued. Game nights followed. Ellie insisted they make chocolate chip pancakes every Sunday morning. And Mara, who once barely touched food, started asking for seconds. Then came the letter. It arrived in a plain white envelope, addressed to Ryan in shaky handwriting. He almost threw it away, thinking it was another stranger trying to thank him. But when he opened it, his stomach turned. It was from the man who had tried to take Mara. The handwriting was uneven, the words short and strange. He said he had seen the news. He had watched the interview where Juliet spoke about healing and where Ryan had said he wasn't a hero, just a father who didn't look away. Something in that interview, he said, had made him want to write. He didn't ask for forgiveness. He only said he was sorry. Ryan stared at the letter for a long time. Part of him wanted to rip it up. Another part wanted to burn it. But he didn't do either. Instead, he folded it back up and placed it in the kitchen drawer, behind the extra napkins and unused batteries. He told Juliet about it later that night. They were sitting on the porch, watching Ellie and Mara draw on the sidewalk with colored chalk. "I don't forgive him," Ryan said quietly. "But I'm not angry anymore." Juliet nodded. "I don't think forgiveness is about him. Maybe it's just about letting ourselves move forward." The moon was rising. The air smelled like rain. And in that moment, Ryan felt something he hadn't expected. Peace. A few weeks later, Juliet brought over a picnic basket and suggested they all spend the afternoon in the backyard. Ryan grilled sandwiches. Ellie chased bubbles. Mara, still quiet, helped set up the blanket under the old oak tree. After lunch, Ryan pulled out an old deck of cards, and the kids taught Juliet how to play a game she'd never heard of. There was laughter. Real, warm, surprising laughter. At one point, Mara leaned over and tied a thin red ribbon around Ellie's wrist. "This means you're brave," she whispered. Ellie beamed. It was small moments like this that built something lasting. Not grand gestures, not big speeches, just love in action. Later that evening, after the dishes were washed and the kids were asleep, Juliet sat at the kitchen table sipping tea while Ryan sorted through old family photos. He handed her one, an old picture of Ellie as a baby wrapped in a yellow blanket. "Melissa picked out that blanket," he said. Juliet looked at the photo and smiled. She had good taste. They sat in silence for a while. Then Ryan looked up. "Do you think we're allowed to be happy again?" Juliet reached for his hand. "I think happiness shows up when you stop chasing it. When you just start being kind to others, to yourself." In the quiet that followed, something settled. Not an answer, but an understanding. Ryan didn't know what to call. It wasn't love, not yet, but it was close. It was safety, comfort. The sense that maybe, just maybe, the worst was behind them, and that whatever lay ahead, they wouldn't face it alone. The morning sun poured through the kitchen windows. Birds chirped softly outside as Ryan Moore poured orange juice into 2 small glasses. Ellie sat at the table, drawing hearts on a piece of scrap paper, her feet swinging beneath the chair. Nearby, Mara helped fold napkins into little triangles, a quiet smile on her face. Spring had arrived fully. The grass was green, the flowers were beginning to bloom, and something else was blooming too. something between them all that no one dared to name out loud. Juliet arrived just before lunch with a bag of fresh rolls and 2 jars of homemade jam. She kissed Mara on the forehead and smiled at Ryan. Their eyes met for a brief moment, saying everything that didn't need to be spoken. They were planning a picnic in the backyard, not for any special reason. No birthdays, no holidays, just because the day felt too beautiful to waste. Ryan set up a blanket under the old oak tree. Ellie brought out her favorite stuffed bear. Mara carried the basket, and Juliet unpacked the food with practiced hands, like she had done it 100 times before. The 4 of them sat together, sharing sandwiches, telling stories, and watching the clouds drift overhead. There was no noise from the world, no tension, only peace. Later that afternoon, Ellie and Mara ran through the yard blowing bubbles. Ryan sat beside Juliet, both of them sipping lemonade in the shade. "She's smiling more," Juliet said, nodding toward Mara. "I haven't seen that in a long time." Ryan followed her gaze. "It's not just her," he said. "You're smiling more too." Juliet looked down, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. "I think being here helps. Being with you. All of you." They didn't speak for a moment. Then, softly, Juliet asked, "Do you ever wonder what life might have looked like if things had been different?" Ryan nodded. "All the time." But then he turned to her, and then I remember that even though it wasn't what I planned, it's still something good. A breeze swept through the yard. The sunlight filtered through the leaves, casting dappled patterns across the blanket. The moment felt quiet, but full. That evening, as the sun began to set, Mara handed Ellie a small bracelet she had made out of string and beads. On it were the letters E and M, side by side. "For when you're scared," Mara said, "so you remember I'm with you." Ellie hugged her tightly. Juliet stood nearby, watching them, her heart full. She turned to Ryan and whispered, "I never expected this, but I think Melissa would be proud." Ryan looked at her. His eyes held tears, but not from grief, not anymore. "And I think your daughter would say the same about you," he said. The words hung in the air like a gentle echo. Not heavy, not sad, just real. The following weeks were filled with moments that mattered. Not big events, but small, meaningful things. Sunday pancakes, evening walks, movie nights with popcorn and pillows scattered across the floor. Mara started keeping a journal. Ellie learned how to ride her bike. And Ryan and Juliet grew closer, not with grand gestures, but with shared laughter, gentle words, and quiet support. One morning, a manila envelope arrived at the house. It was a follow-up letter from the prosecutor about Mara's case. The man who had tried to take her was sentenced and would not be eligible for release for a long time. Ryan handed the letter to Juliet without a word. She read it slowly, then folded it and placed it back in the envelope. "It's over," she said softly. "At least that part is." Ryan nodded. "And now we just keep going." She smiled. Together. That night, after the kids had gone to bed, Ryan and Juliet sat on the porch, sipping tea under a sky full of stars. The house was quiet. The world was still. "Do you think families always come together in the way they're supposed to?" Ryan asked. Juliet thought for a moment. "I think the best ones come together when they're needed most." In that silence, something unspoken passed between them. Not a promise, not a question, just understanding. Months later, on a warm summer morning, Ryan stood in his backyard watching Ellie and Mara play catch. Juliet was beside him, brushing dirt off her jeans from the garden bed they'd just planted together. They didn't talk about the past much anymore. They didn't have to. The present was full. Their lives had become a quiet kind of beautiful. They weren't bound by blood, but they were bound by choice, by kindness. by moments of courage and patience that had stitched them together in ways no one could have predicted. And as Ryan looked around at the scene before him, he realized something. He hadn't just saved a girl in that parking lot. He had been saved too. In a world that often feels cold and uncertain, sometimes the smallest act of bravery can lead to something bigger than we imagine. Not every family is born. Some are built. And sometimes they're the ones that last the longest.